Hello, hi, Surahimi and fellow friends. My name is Nazira and my partner today is Alia Fatima. We are from Group 9. Today we're going to present about an article by Lajiman Januri titled Towards Understanding the Psyche of the Malaysian Diaspora, a reading of K.S. Maniam's short story. So this is basically what we'll discuss this afternoon. Firstly is the overview, and then a short introduction of the writer, including the author of the article, and then the summary of the article, our viewpoint and opinion, and lastly the work cited. So we'll start with the overview of the article. This article is written by Lajiman Januri. It explores the physical fragmentation among migrant communities through four prominent short stories written by K.S. Maniam, which firstly, The Haunting of the Tiger, and then The Eagles, The Third Child, and lastly, The Terminal. Some of the topics discussed in this article includes the issue of identity and sense of belongingness faced by these migrant people. It also discusses the different viewpoints presented by K.S. Maniam in his four short story on the same predicament of people living in foreign land. Moving on to the short introduction to the writer, I will introduce you to the author of this article, who is Lajiman Januri. Dr. Lajiman Januri is a senior lecturer at Tanjung Malim's University Pendidikan Sultan Idris, which you may know as UPSI. He has a very vast expertise in Malaysian education at many levels and contexts. He also taught at the primary and secondary levels before becoming a senior lecturer at UPSI. And his current research interests include post-colonial literature and also world literature. These are his academic qualifications. He has done his degree and master study at UKM and his PhD study in Melbourne, Australia. He has published many articles before. These are just some of the example of his published work: The Author's Personality Under Freelances and the Exploration of Resistance. Next, Alia Fatima will present the biography of K.S. Maniam.
Okay, so here is about K.S. Maniam. He was born in 1942 in Bedung Kedah. He is of Hindu, Tamil, and working class background. His grandmother migrated from India in 1916, and K.S. Maniam attended Tamil State School as well as Ibrahim English School at Sungai Petani. He later studied medicine in India and studied teacher education in England. He also attended Malayan Teachers College in Wolverhampton from 1962 until 1964. He resided at Brinsford Lodge, where the ethnically mixed fellow lodgers there reminded him of Malaysian society. When he returned to Malaysia, he taught in various schools. He got his degree of arts and English at University of Malaya and also master's degree in English literature at University of Malaya. K.S. Maniam has a thesis entitled A Critical History of Malaysian and Singaporean Poetry in English. He retired from an associate professorship in the Department of English in 1997. Sadly, he died of cancer of the bile duct on February 19, 2020.
Moving on to the summary of the article. Throughout the decades, most Malaysians have held the same outlook towards English literature, in which they view English literature as a challenging education field that is difficult to grasp. However, they have no choice but to learn it since it was part of the school syllabus. In January's article, he wants readers to understand that literature is more than just merely comprehending literary works or being able to write competently, but it also serves as one of the ways to effectively educate students on how to look at situations, problems, or answer questions from various perspectives, to view things in various perspectives. It helps us to understand people and various aspects of humanity. He also mentioned in his article, especially in a multicultural society like Malaysia, the country we live in, literature could work admirably as a bridge to connect the ethnic divisions and the gaps between races. He thinks that learning literature can ease the process of nation formation, where citizens will be united based on the feeling of justice and impartiality. We can then respect and understand each other's culture very well. As mentioned before, this article analyzes four short stories from K.S. Maniam, which are Hunting the Tiger, The Eagles, The Third Child, and also The Terminal. All these four texts have a similar prominent theme of nation building, in which the characters deal with issues of identity crisis and also hybridity. Each story is also very similar in a way they depict the conflict between a man's desire to preserve his culture in its entirety and the need to assimilate the dominant cultural influences in the land. While writing his four short story, K.S. Maniam is very well aware of the sensitive issue that he illustrates in his story, but he still chooses to continue writing in order to establish an understanding among us Malaysians in the sense that we can understand each other's distinct heritage. He wants all Malaysians to be able to live peacefully without any prejudices. His aim is to foster compassion and respect among races, culture, as well as to build a more cohesive and united community. Next is the hardships faced by the diaspora. After the British brought in immigrants before our independent day, particularly from China and India, the races were left to sort out the differences. Post-colonization, all races were struggling to establish their identity. The immigrants come to realize that they had to blend with the prevailing culture in order to thrive in the newly independent land. This causes emotions of dispersal and fragmentations of the psyche, as well as personality alteration among the immigrants. For them, it is very difficult to live in a country where one is seen as minority. It is mentioned in the article there are two difficulty and hardship faced by this immigrant. The very first difficulty is physical survival, such as the food necessity, like how they're going to put bread on the table to eat, their food, and what clothes they're going to wear, and so on. They are struggling very much at that time even to have the basic needs in their life. The second hardship that a minority individual must overcome is physical hardship, which occurs when the immigrant lost their sense of belongingness in a foreign land. They have to force themselves to adapt to existing dominant culture at a new land and endure the emptiness left by the loss of one's culture sense, which according to January, even wealth cannot fill the void. Next is K.S. Maniam's purpose of writing this four short story. The foundation of Maniam's short story is actually based on his own experiences, and for Maniam, writing serves two main purposes. The first one is to highlight the topic of immigrant cultural fragmentation and dispersal so that it may be acknowledged. He wants people to know the hardship and the pain that these immigrants have to go through in their early life, coming to Tanah Melayu at that time. The second purpose is to function as physical therapy to treat the physical trauma caused by the fragmentations. I think, in my opinion, K.S. Maniam wants people to relate to his writing and somehow feel soothed to know that they're not the only one who go through the pain. Next, moving on to the cultural fragmentations among the diaspora. Cultural fragmentation and dispersal that the immigrant face are very difficult to put into words since they develop in the psyche. However, in order to make peace with the fragmentation, they need to confront it. For example, in K.S. Maniam's The Hunting Tiger, Maniam subtly raises the issue of cultural fragmentations where one of the characters has unresolved feelings and cannot die in peace. The character is an old man and he fails to find his cultural identity. Following the excerpt and the short story, the old man had trouble dying. The peace he had hoped for was disturbed by dreams. Some of these dreams took on the sharp edges of a nightmare and kept sleep away. The word death and peace in the text express the reality of residing in foreign country. They feel like they are suffocating and dying living in foreign land. They cannot find peace that they once had in their homeland. The word dreams and nightmare also brings out a contradicting meaning in which one means hope and the other means reality. The character cannot fully live with the foreign culture or attain peace when they ignore their own local culture. They realize that they need to reset their original culture identity in order to adapt and find peace. However, the man from the excerpt just now, he refuses to do so and he ultimately faces an unpeaceful death. Next, Fatima will continue to present the next slide.
So in dealing with cultural integration and to be accepted by the land, sacrifices is needed. Mutu has to change his cultural psyche to suit the culture in the new land. This can be seen in the story when Zulkifli suggests that Mutu sacrificing part of himself will help him find the tiger. So you brought a purpose with you and a way of thinking. How can you get into the tiger's stripes and spirit? Actually, Zulkifli provides him the clue. In order to fit into this space, he must modify his cultural psyche to suit the demands of the new land. Mutu here actually tries to preserve his cultural roots, as he does not want to mollify the part of himself to see the tiger. The story actually depicts how Mutu is not ready to sacrifice himself to gain his faith in the dominating culture. This dilemma leaves him to feel as having two identities, or as a chameleon, where he has to change to suit the environment. This also suggests that by being a chameleon, where he reshapes his identity, is actually a solution to find a place in the new land. It is important to know Mutu has to reshape, not relegate, as relegate is equal to the action of denying his self-identity. When he does this reshaping of culture, it allows him to stand side by side with other culture. Next slide. Ganesan, a character in the story The Eagle, lives within his inherited culture where rigid case system has trapped himself psychologically. I think what Lajiman Januri explains in his article is that how K.S. Maniam actually portray that within one's culture, there are also divisions and segregation. These divisions and segregations are as a result of having differences in class and status in which these things are demarcated by territorial and social boundaries. These contradictions form another dilemma in K.S. Maniam's psyche, whether to live in an adopted land while retaining his inherited cultural identity, or revolt and fight against traditions or some aspects of his culture, which he feels do not run to his sense of justice and equality. For instance, Ganesan in The Eagle has to deal with being bullied by the upper class. Dirty laundry was thrown by an upper class family living upstairs. According to Lajiman Januri, this may be one of the ways of K.S. Maniam shows the reality that the rot or the dirt resides at the upper level. The upper class is also the cause of the suffering of Ganesan, the lower class. Next slide. So, K.S. Maniam states two stages of turmoil in his psyche in dealing with the issue of traditions and values, which are, first, between one's own culture, and second, between received culture. The attempts to solve this dilemma is through wealth gaining, which can be found in the story of the third child and hunting the tiger, and the second solution is by ignoring cultural contests in the new land, which can be found in the short story The Terminal. Value and the third child depicts how money or wealth is seen as solution to the dilemma. Muthu in Hunting the Tiger also buys land to gain a sense of belonging in an adopted land. As he said in the text, for me, money tells me everything. That's enough. These examples depict how immigrants believe that wealth would buy a place for their cultural space and money as an escapism. Kotsang's character in The Terminal, who believes that ignoring cultural contests can be as a solution to the dilemma. Little did he know that ignoring will exacerbate cultural issues as more, not resolving them. Kotsang's realization that ignoring is not the solution is when dominant culture plays a bigger role. So when this dominant culture plays a bigger role, the symbiosis of culture will never be achievable. It is also important to know that sacrifices can be painful and it can be violent, but it is necessary for without sacrifice, a culture can be forgotten or be swallowed into unrecognizable entity by the notion of joint culture. So in conclusion, in a country where various cultures exist together, the sensitivities and aspirations towards the needs of others are the only way of avoiding suspicions, thus ensuring a peaceful coexistence. The cultures of the diaspora should also be able to reshape and transform themselves to fit into the general cultural and social landscape of the land. Only with mutual understanding and willingness to sacrifice any culture will enable the smooth progress of nation building.
Moving on to the next section, which is our view on the arguments presented in the article. After reading this article, although I am not in the immigrant's shoe, I can somehow understand the immigrants' feeling when they are forced to leave their homeland to migrate to another country. They must feel very sad and lost at that time. So I think as a human being, firstly, we should have compassion and tenderness towards everyone to promote meaningful connection with each other. We should try to understand people's feeling as everyone has their own sufferings and hardship they have to go through. Next, I also think that as a community, we should treat people with justice and fairness without any discrimination and prejudices. we should make people feel welcome as much as possible in our country. Um, Discrimination brings no good at all and will only disrupt one's well-being, their self-esteem, also will promote fear and stress to those people. Alia will present the other 2 points.
The dominating culture should never ever feel superior over the other culture. Once having to live with the dominating culture is fine as long as the dominant culture does not oppress the other culture and allow them to preserve their own culture. The settlers should alter themselves to adapt with the dominant culture without ignoring their inherited culture. Personally, I think that once having to sacrifice their own culture in order to survive and thrive in the land of others is grievous. However, after reading this article, it has opened my mind that as a newcomer, it is comprehensible that tolerating one's own inherited culture is necessary. What I think Legiman Jamuri and K.S. Maniam suggests is for any Malaysian settler is for them to not completely abolish their culture in order to fit in the dominating culture, as it will eradicate their own self-identity and self-value. As I mentioned earlier, being in the minority culture also does not mean that one has to annihilate the entirety of their culture and create a totally different psyche, as this just means that they are faking their culture and identity. The reshaping and transformation of their culture is advocated.
Lastly, the list of works cited. This is all works cited. I think that's all from us. Thank you.